Record. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our fourth installment of our Stand-Up Dads, the gender conversations that we've been doing here every Monday in March. And I'm really excited for this week. The first few weeks we focused on developmental stages and then equity at home. And today we're really going to be talking about in the workplace. And before I turn it over to Michelle, I just want to give a special shout out to our attendees for being here, for our sponsors, Fenwick and West, and Susie and my classroom party for really underwriting the cost of this at Fathering Together. Our goal is really creating virtual communities for support and guidance and sharing of resources. And as a nonprofit, we really want to make sure that there's no financial barriers or any barriers really for helping dads get the resources and skills that they need. And so we want to give a special shout out to our sponsors and all of our donors for making that a reality. So I will turn things over to Michelle and I'll be back at the end to give my thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. I'm Michelle Travis. I am a very proud board member of Fathering Together. I'm also a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law, where I research male allyship for gender equity and work-family integration. And I'm also the author of the book called Dads for Daughters. So I am really excited to be here today with two dads and two all-in allies for gender equity as part of this Stand-Up Dads conversation series. So as Brian said, today we're going to focus on how dads can be stronger allies for gender equity in the workplace. And I think this is more important than ever right now in the pandemic, which we know is disproportionately affecting working moms. So really important conversation to be having right now. So let me start by welcoming Dave and Brad, our two speakers for today. So excited to have you here. So first we have Brad Johnson. Brad is a professor of psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the U.S. Naval Academy. He is also a faculty associate at the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. He's an expert on mentorship, and he is also trained as a clinical psychologist. And on top of that, he is a former commissioned naval officer. So welcome, Brad. It's so great to have you here today.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, love it. And we also have Brad's comrade in arms, David Smith. Dave, so nice to have you. Dave is an associate professor of sociology in the College of Leadership and Ethics at the U.S. Naval War College. He researches gender, work-family issues, dual career couples. David is trained as a sociologist and as a social psychologist, and he's a former Navy combat pilot. And I will say, in addition to these all of these experiences, Brad and Dave are have both taken on perhaps what may be their most challenging role, which is the role of fathers. And I suspect that even naval combat training is not totally prepare you for that particular role. But we're really excited to have you here. You know, Brad and Dave's newest mission is to work together to help other men become stronger allies and mentors and collaborators with women to advance gender equity in the workplace. Brad and Dave are the co-authors of two fantastic books on male allyship. Their newest book is called Good Guys: How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. And their prior book is called Athena Rising: How and Why Men Should Mentor Women. And I'm so grateful for your work. I'm so grateful to have you here to talk with the Fathering Together community about male allyship. So welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be included here.
Fabulous. Well, before we dive into the research from your book, I'd love to start by just asking sort of the big picture question for our Fathering Together community, which is, what does being a dad have to do with being a male ally for gender equity in the workplace? Why is that connection so important for both of you? Why do you think other dads should be making that connection for themselves?
Yeah, go ahead and kick off, Dave. I'll join you.
That's a great question, you know, and it's interesting as we talk about allyship in the workplace. Men, I think, are often surprised when we talk about where do you begin? Where do you start your journey? And because we tell them that, you know, gender equity really starts at home. If you're going to create equity in the workplace, we have to really think about this from a home perspective. And certainly we know that, again, that women have, you know, carried the burden of domestic responsibility and done, you know, even before the pandemic, you know, twice as much work at home unpaid work and unpaid labor as their male partners. And certainly the pandemic has made that even worse, and childcare responsibilities. And now with, as we're talking about, like the third shift in terms of homeschooling and adding that on, and the effects of that, we're beginning to see it, is how it's affecting careers and women's paid work, and having to, in many cases, being forced out of the workforce because, again, you haven't forced to make choices and decisions about, what are you going to do? Are you going to take care of family, or we're going to go for paid work? And so we see, ourselves slipping backwards in many ways when it comes to gender equity in the workplace. But dads make a difference when it comes to, being a parent, and we often focus on the current generation that's out there in the workforce, but as parents, we're working on raising that next generation that's going out there. And so we have a really important responsibility in terms of how we raise them, and the research backs it up, that we have a significant influence, no surprise, right, as parents, on our children, and how that affects their outcomes as we think about them when they're getting old enough to go off on their own and join the workforce. And certainly when they see us role modeling and really setting the example, what it looks like to be an all-in equal ally at home, and doing your fair share of equitable work, and supporting your partner's career, it makes a difference in their outcomes. And so for our sons in particular, they have a very different perspective on what gender roles look like, a more inclusive perspective of what that looks like. And so in many ways, when they hit the workplace, when they become old enough to get out there, they're carrying those expectations of what that looks like, and how they're going to form families, and how they're going to combine work and family in a way that meets their needs and what they expect. And so I think that's really important. And I think for our daughters, even more important, because when they see their dads role modeling this behavior and being these all-in equal allies at home, they are more likely to persist in their careers, reach their career goals and dreams. And also, I think, really interesting, if we're going to get to gender parity and gender balance in a lot of these traditionally male-dominated professions like law, your own profession, right? We've got to have more women entering into those. And so we find that again, our daughters who see this and they're around this all the time, they're more likely to go into those non-traditional professions. And so lots of influences here that we have to take, I think, ownership of, and really begin to commit to doing the work.
Yeah, and I would just add, Michelle, in addition to the really important stuff Dave just covered, that remember that I am, as a dad, influencing the next generation in terms of what workplace looks like. And we know one thing for a fact, and that is that women, in the way our culture is working right now, are never going to get to share equally at work unless men are sharing equally at home. That's just a fundamental truth. I think something like 5 million women have been forced out of the workforce in the pandemic that we're in right now. But even before the pandemic, we had that, women were making 80% of what men are making. Women were not serving in senior leadership in most organizations and professions. So we already had a big deficit in inclusion. And we know that part of the issue here is that women have not been able to say yes to opportunities for advancement. They haven't been able to share equally in the workplace, because if they're partnered with men, men are not sharing equally at home, and the evidence about that is really clear. So gosh, that is job number one. As Dave said, guys are often shocked when they ask us, hey, where does this allyship stuff begin? And it's not so glamorous, guys. You don't get to throw on your ally cape and go to work. You actually have to start the work at home.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. I love when you talk about allyship as being all in at work and at home, and that the former requires the latter. And I appreciate really you highlighting the research about the impact that this has, because I think as dads, but as parents generally, it's hard for us to feel that impact on a day-to-day basis when we're doing the hard work of day-to-day parenting. And so it's good to have a reminder about the kinds of long-term impacts we have on that next generation. I think it just really helps all of us as we do that that difficult juggle on a day-to-day basis. And the role modeling piece of it is so important, Brad. I think I remember reading in the book in your intro about you talking about your dad as a role model for you. So you've seen it kind of on both sides.
Yeah, I have, and that was really quite powerful for me, Michelle, on multiple levels. You know, I think two things about that experience with my own father. I mean, number one, my mother was a primary breadwinner. Even though my dad was a full-time professional, mom's career was really the career in the couple. And so I saw my dad come home every day, make dinner, you know, clean the house, fold the laundry. He was just kind of all in that way. And there was never really a whole lot of doubt in our mind as kids that this was a role that he took, you know, quite seriously, and the whole sharing. But then, you know, the other piece of that is supporting your partner's career fully and letting your kids see that. You know, what does that look like when I'm a champion for my partner's career and I make that really clear? I think too often, you know, men might not lean in that way and not communicate that to kids. Your mom's career is just as important as mine. If I'm partnered with a woman, I've got to be communicating that. So that was really, both of those were really important for me.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful, and our kids take all of that in and absorb all of that. So each of those moments of modeling does really have a big impact. Well, thank you. Well, so we have dads who are making this connection, who are ready to get involved, who are doing their all-in job at home, and now are thinking about, how do I also become an all-in ally at work? So can we start maybe by just having you define, what does it mean to be a male ally at work? What are maybe some very specific, you know, 2 or 3 things that you think of that excellent male leaders, male allies for women do in the workplace? What does that role mean?
Yeah, let me start by defining it first, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the specific actions. So it's really clear that, you know, allyship has several components to it, and the first is that it's really, this is how guys talked about it in particular, and many of them dads, about how it's really, the easy part is the interpersonal allyship. So how do I show up in terms of every day, in terms of the relationships I have with women at work, and being supportive and being collaborative, being an advocate for gender equity and justice and fairness, and really kind of holding myself individually accountable for that, for doing that work. And guys looked at that and said, you know, that's the easy part because I only have to worry about me. They said the hard part was really around what they called public allyship, or active allyship was another way to think about it. And that is because, you know, they felt like, wow, you know, by putting some skin in the game, I'm really accepting a little bit of risk in a variety of different ways that they felt, and felt really uncomfortable with it in some cases. But this is really about not just holding myself accountable, but now I have to hold other people accountable. So my teammates, people in my organization, leaders in my organization itself, I have to take accountability for that. And that gets into some of the systemic aspects as well. The everyday practices where, again, where bias injects itself and we can begin to create inequities, like the lack of representation of women at the senior ranks, the lack of pay equity when we think about those. And so these men talked about how, yeah, as you begin to understand how these are created, now you have to take ownership of the problem and begin to look at how can I begin to disrupt that, and really call attention to it in a way that we're going to make productive change to it. But maybe, Brad, maybe I'll start off with some of the best of around interpersonal allyship, and Brad can talk to you a little bit about the public allyship parts. But you know, in particular, you know, we all come to this, I think, in different places, and I think that's important to remember, that allyship is really about this journey, and we're in different places, and so we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace here, and understanding that we're not perfect and we're going to make mistakes along the way, and understanding that. But the first part of this is really about developing awareness of the problem. And a lot of men told us that, you know, one of the challenges, because most men do believe in gender equity, by the way, but understanding what exactly it is to do, what should I be doing? I don't really understand, maybe in some cases, the problem, because I'm not affected by it in a lot of ways. that they have to begin developing awareness. And this begins by self-education. So reading great books out there like yours, and articles, and attending events like today, and really kind of beginning to understand how other people might experience the workplace very differently than yourself. And as I begin to get a sense of where these differences are, then I can go back into my workplace and look at, where do I see connections and commonalities? And, oh, I heard or read about that. And, oh, I see this happening over here. And so you can make those connections and then go to the next step. And that's really to engage your female colleagues, for the guys out there, to have a conversation and really put some skin in the game and talk about these really hard issues. And they said it was really helpful to approach these with a lot of humility, and that remember that, I don't have all the answers here. I got a lot to learn, and keep that learning orientation, that focus there, and the curiosity, really pique that curiosity when you go into this work, and then ask about this, gosh, I really like to learn more about this. I'm trying to be a better ally. What's one thing I could do more of or less of this week that would make, your experience here in the workplace better? Some men said they were even uncomfortable asking that, because it still felt like, they were putting upon somebody else to really to educate them. And they said, I felt better if I just asked to ask. Would it be okay if I asked you about your experiences? And I'm really trying to be better. And what could I do? And so there's a lot that goes into that. But really, the last part of this is really understanding that this humility has to extend beyond just kind of gender. It has to go into some intersectional aspects as well, and recognizing that women, just like men, and we're not a monolith, right? That we all have very different experiences. We can't make too many assumptions about what your experience is doesn't necessarily connect to all women's experiences, and my experience doesn't connect to all men's experiences. And that in particular for women of color, we know they have very different experiences in the workplace. And so we have to be attuned to those as well. But so developing awareness is really important. But I think it's important to remember that women told us, we had lots of interviews with women across industries and professions, and a lot of very senior, incredibly successful women out there told us that the number one thing that they wish men would do more of and be better at is listening. And the thing that they most appreciated from a great ally and a great mentor was somebody who could really have great listening skills. And they listened with an intent to understand, right? To develop some empathy for somebody else's experiences, and we're open to that, and not necessarily about making assumptions or listening to fix a problem or to fix you, as often happens out there. And so these listening skills were really important. They talked about it in terms of really generous listening, that men can be doing more of, and we could practice more of this out there. Not making the gendered assumptions. Again, just because she's a woman, she must therefore need, want, have, right? It's really important, especially as we think about the workplace and career conversations we're having. And then as we develop these close relationships, these might be friendships, allyships, mentorships, all sorts of professional relationships with women in the workplace. One of the things that we need to get out of this as men is we need feedback on how we're doing as allies. And so we have to have that good trusting relationship where we're going to get the hard critical feedback and maybe hear things that we don't want to hear sometimes, but we need to hear it because that's what's going to make us better, right? And then we can begin to share what we've learned in those conversations. But as guys, we don't always respond in the way that we should, and showing that we care, and it's a gift to get that kind of feedback out there. And so we need to practice and think about how do we begin to do that in a more caring and valuing way. Those are a few of the kind of the best of around the interpersonal, but I'll let Brad tell you a little bit about maybe some of the public allyship and systemic aspects.
Yeah, I'll just give you a couple highlights, Michelle. The public part, as Dave said, is harder, right? Now I got to put skin in the game. Now I got to risk losing my man card, breaking the bro code, actually confronting things and calling them out. And men struggle with this, right? Because now I'm beyond holding myself accountable, I'm holding others accountable, and in particular other men. So a big piece of this, as Dave was getting to, is a situational awareness. I think often we men miss things that happen to women every day in meetings, in other workplace venues. So, easy example, women get interrupted 3 times more than men. And so if I'm a guy and I want to be a better ally, can I start noticing that? Can I start paying attention? Who's in the room, who's not, who's included, who's not? And can I say something about that and make sure that I call it out? You know, hey, why isn't Michelle here? She's the expert on this topic. Well, I don't think we should be discussing this until she's here, and she should be leading the meeting. When that guy makes a sexist joke in the meeting, which happens like every other day, you know, what are we going to do? And men freeze up just like everyone else. We get bystander paralysis. I got to say something, and that's not always easy, but I have to disrupt. And then I have to make I statements about this. You know, I didn't appreciate that, or I don't like the way you just demean my female colleagues. I would appreciate it if you'd not do that. I can't say, hey, Dave, dude, there are women in the room. You know, you can't say that. No, that communicates the wrong thing. And now I'm putting my discomfort on women. No, I'm the one who didn't like it. And let me articulate why. Confronting other men is a part of this. And that's hard, right? You know, Dave and I have a hashtag we like, bro no. Got to have the bro no conversation with men. And you know, I can do that in different ways. I don't have to get all DEFCON 5 confrontive and angry. I can go to him after the meeting and say, you know, hey, buddy, you can't say that. When you said that today, everyone cringed. And let me tell you why. You know, there are moments in a meeting where a serial misogynist is going to say things that are just so inappropriate. I'm going to call him out right there. I'm going to do the bro no intervention right in the middle of the meeting. But, you know, I have to make that calculus in the moment, but I can't, not disrupting is not an option. And then just one more I'll give you, Michelle, around the public side is the sponsoring. We know all the research shows that women are radically under-sponsored. So they may have mentors who are kind of nice to them, you know, and maybe do the interpersonal side of providing support, but they're not talking about them, you know, for opportunities and promotions. One of the people we got to interview for our first book, Athena Rising, was Cheryl Sandberg out in your neck of the woods. And, you know, Cheryl said, hey, if I can give men one piece of instruction on being a better mentor for women, don't forget the sponsorship. She said, you know, my first job out of college, I was a primary assistant to the Secretary of the US Treasury. And everywhere we went on the world stage, he would introduce me to world leaders and say, this is Cheryl Sandberg. She's a rock star, graduated #1 in economics from Harvard. She's amazing. He would just go on and on. And she pulled him aside and said, Larry, stop. It's embarrassing. And he said, Cheryl, this is how it begins. This is sponsoring. You need to let me do this. If people know what I think of you, they're going to want you to work for them too. So litmus test for men, I think. Are you talking about her when she's not in the room? Are you telling people how great she is, what she's accomplished, why she should be on the list for that next promotion?
Yeah. Absolutely, so helpful. And I will just say from the perspective of a woman who has watched male allies in action doing some of the things that you say, it is deeply appreciated because it is so powerful for someone else to do the interrupting and in a way that then gives space for women to have the floor. And I really appreciate the way you talk about it with I statements, right? Taking it on as your own, owning it as your own belief system, as your own value system, really as it goes such a far way in building that allyship, which then turns around and builds the trust back to the interpersonal piece of it, right? Which then allows you to have those trusted colleagues to provide the feedback loop. And Dave, I love some of the words that you were using when you described allyship, you know, the importance of listening, empathy, humility, curiosity. And one of the things that I get really excited about these allyship conversations and sort of seeing over time is in the long term, I think some of those allyship skills are now really starting to perceived as leadership skills. And when it becomes not just allyship for gender equity, but we expect our leaders to demonstrate those skills that are allyship skills, I think that's when we really start making progress. So this is really helpful, I think, to give sort of concrete ways for men who really want to engage and step up and speak out and be that kind of all-in ally. One of the things I notice when I hear you talking, of course, is that part of what you're asking men to do is, in some ways, really recognize their own privilege, and really share their power and their influence. And that can be a difficult thing to do. So what advice do you have about really being able to identify privilege and share power in the moment?
Yeah, I can jump in, but Dave, I know you'll have thoughts about privilege. You know, Dave and I, I think in our book, Good Guys, we actually refer to this as the P word. We don't actually call it privilege because men get so defensive sometimes when you talk about privilege. You know, and I understand that, right? You know, the first response often from men when that word comes up is, what? I was born this way, or I worked really hard. And you know, we're not suggesting anything other than that. We know you've worked hard. So have your female colleagues. The difference here is that we as guys, and especially white men like Dave and I, have been cruising through life with what we like to describe as this backpack of opportunity, you know, and a lot of us men don't know that that backpack is even there, right? We've been experiencing tailwinds. We've got this backpack that gives us access and opportunity in ways that other people don't experience the world. And the irony is that it's only when I kind of look back and realize I've got this backpack on that I have this amazing opportunity to share my privilege. And I can't do that. I can't use my privilege effectively for others in the workplace if I don't acknowledge it as a starting point. So I think that's a big message to men is, boy, recognizing privilege opens up all kinds of doors for you in terms of opportunities to do great things and share a bit of that with others. And let's, you know, recognize that, you know, as white men in particular, we've had sort of the best of when it comes to both race and gender. And I think all you need to do is establish some trust with a few female colleagues and ask them about some of their own experiences in the workplace and some of those gendered headwinds. And that's going to be a nice way for you to begin to recognize this backpack once you start to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, so spot on. And I love the way you frame that, Michelle, in terms of this is really about leadership at the end of the day. And this is one of the places where Brad and I started this conversation way back when, or with Athena Rising, was we just noticed that too often, like a women's mentoring program or women's leadership initiative, you know, they're labeled that way for good reason, right? And where the focus is, but then men would look at that and go, it's not for me, and they would just tune it out. And I think reframing these as leadership issues, right, that affect men and women is so important. But the other, I think, important part of this is that recognizing that the leadership skills and traits and things that made leaders successful, you know, maybe, for example, our fathers, are not what's going to make you successful today in the 21st century. And certainly in a very diverse workforce, it's getting more diverse every day. It's not going to make you sad. Things have changed. And so our leadership has to change with that. And this is part of it. Allyship really is some great leadership skills. If you just integrate that into who you are, it's part of your brand of who you are as a leader. And I think that would serve a lot of male leaders really well. And part of that is acknowledging that privilege. And it's really uncomfortable. It's a really uncomfortable conversation to have with men, and men talking about it just, you know, it just puts us on edge very quickly, because it feels like, well, you know, all to this point, you know, what have I worked for? What everything I may have achieved, was it really about me or not? And, you know, it's like, yeah, you've worked hard, but there were things that were helping us that were hurting others out there. And I think acknowledging that and really hearing that, and that's where the empathy comes into play, I think is really important. We had so many great stories from male allies about how once they had recognized what their privilege was and then what they could do with it, how they just felt, wow, you know, I have this great power, and so now I have to do something great with it. And there were so many little things and big things they did. And, you know, example from a small thing, a lot of men talked about how they noticed in a group setting, in a meeting, for example, the focus of attention would automatically come to them, whether they were the leader of the meeting, whether they were the expert in the room or not. The focus of attention just would kind of come naturally to them. And they said that, it was really easy to acknowledge that, hey, when that focus of attention comes to me and I don't need it, or it shouldn't be on me, that I can shift that very quickly and easily. And they call this decentering, this decenter, and move out of the center, out of the spotlight, and shift it to somebody else very naturally. And so, if somebody asked, hey, Dave, what do you think about this? And I go, well, I'd love to share my thoughts on that, but Michelle here, she is the expert, and I'd really like to hear what she has to say. And so I've quickly decentered myself. I've handed you the mic. I've given you the lateral toss, out whatever metaphor you like. And now you can start to do the work there. But it's not a big deal. It's really easy, but you have to, one, be aware of it and understand your own privilege and how you can be able to do that. And there are so many ways that, other men talked about how, for example, very senior men who often get invited to be on panels and to be maybe on boards and things like that, that they would look at the panels, they would look at the board, and they would say, it's full of just a bunch of other white men. And what I would really like to see is some diversity there. So tell you what, I'm going to say no. But here's a list of 3 or 4 people. I'm going to put you in contact with them, of people that I think would be better than me to serve on your board, to serve on this panel, and really add something that I can't add. And so here, I'll make the connection for you and let you take it from there. That's real allyship, right? That's really, the giving and understanding your privilege and using it to create the good.
Yeah. It's powerful. It's really, really powerful. Well, thank you for that piece of the conversation. I think P word, yes, is a really difficult part of this, because that piece of the conversation is not meant to, denigrate any of the effort that all of us are making, and in our work-life juggle. But I really like the concept, Brad, of the tailwinds and headwinds, right? Tailwinds and headwinds kind of sort of puts it in perspective, right? What the sort of different experiences that men and women often have. And Dave, a lot of what you're talking about, the decentering sort of, the lateral pass, right? What I like about that too is that it's a sharing of power, but in the end, I think it allows everyone to rise together in a sense, right? And so one of the things that I would love you to talk about is sort of the way in which this sharing of power is not actually a zero-sum game, right? Which is what it feels like. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, in the research that you've done and your allyship and talking with other male allies, the ways in which you found that men actually really benefit from advancing gender equity in their workplaces and from playing these roles in really powerful ways. The anti-zero-sum game, the win-win of all of this.
Yeah, that zero-sum fallacy or bias, it's so prevalent out there, and it's really a shame, because it really, in many ways, holds back this opportunity for collaboration and for everybody to win, because there is really a win-win here for everyone. We had a chance to write an article with Katika Roy on this topic in Harvard Business Review, and Brad just recently did a webinar with her on the same topic. But I think, what we lose sight of here is that the win-win for guys in particular is not recognizing the benefits of what happens when you really integrate allyship and these skills and actions into your form of leadership, your brand of leadership, because it makes you somebody that people want to seek out. They seek you out for all sorts of reasons, but a lot of times it's for collaboration and for opportunity, right? Because they know you're one of those people who's willing to share, right, in doing that. And so it makes you a magnet in many ways for other people to come together, and you bring all sorts of great knowledge and resources together, and new relationships and more connections. And again, if you're in this for money in your company, like a lot of companies are, that makes you more valuable, and it makes your company more valuable. You have growth, and there's capacity to grow here. And I think that's what we're missing. It's too much focus on the threat, the gosh, I'm going to lose suddenly because of all this, and that if I share my power, I'm somehow lesser than or losing in terms of my job or my responsibility. And unfortunately, that's not the case. And I think getting us to understand the benefits of what's out there and how this works for everyone, I think, again, get more men engaged in doing this work.
Yeah, we have a mantra, Michelle, that this fixed pie fallacy, there actually is no pie, that, and I think it's really important for men to hear that the business evidence is so clear that when you have better gender inclusion, when you have better gender balance and leadership all the way up into the C-suite, your company or organization just does better. You make more money, you're more creative, you're more geared for the long haul. The pie is sort of this metaphor that sounds like the pool of resources is fixed. Those companies grow, more opportunity, more promotions for everyone. So this is terrific for me as a male who is really leveraging inclusion. The pie is getting huge, every day that we really lean into this.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful just to sort of be reminded of that at all levels. It's really, really not a zero-sum game, but it's so hard in the moment to necessarily see that big picture. And that's another opportunity, I think, for leaders to be making sure that everyone sees that big picture. So we've talked a little bit about, some of the barriers that you see for men who maybe are supportive of gender equity, committed to it, but barriers to really stepping up and speaking up. I mean, Brad, you said originally that once you're that public ally, once you're playing a kind of disruptor role, there's some risks involved with that. So wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of the range of typical barriers that you see sometimes prevent men who want to become involved, but from actually sort of stepping in to be an all-in public ally, and what are some strategies for maybe addressing some of those barriers?
Yeah. So, gosh, how long is our session tonight? Dave and I, when we were working on Athena Rising and doing all the research for that, we found so many reasons why men stand back and don't engage. We actually came up with our own term, reluctant male syndrome. And so I'll just give you some of the elements of reluctant male syndrome. And I think these are things that men can overcome, but I think they are operating right now and keeping some men out of the inclusion game. Number one, I would say, is anxiety. Frankly, men are worried about stepping in it, saying the wrong thing, making a mistake. As a gender, guys like to know what to do and have all the directions, and so if they don't know exactly what a certain kind of relationship looks like, they may stay on the sidelines. There are men who are genuinely anxious post Me Too. And I think we just have to address that head on. All the research from Bloomberg and Lean In after Me Too, showing that about 60% of men, at least in corporate America, are now saying, yeah, I'm just not as comfortable having a mentoring conversation with a woman or having coffee even, in the workplace, because I'm worried about ramifications for that. And I think we just need to really call that out, honestly, Michelle. And Dave and I are really comfortable doing that. That's ridiculous. It's based on false narratives about what Me Too is all about. Me Too is super simple. We love to share this with men. Women would love to come to work and not be assaulted or harassed. Really low bar for guys to get over. I mean, this is not tough. But you're hearing the false narratives that, oh gosh, women are dangerous now. And it's just flat out not true. So we've looked at the data. It's incredibly rare for a woman to make a false accusation. So if you're two bumbling guys like Dave and I trying to get better and be, helpful, you're not likely to have any risk here. So I think those are big issues. I think some men have, frankly, ongoing biases about women. And if these are not conscious, and many times they're not, he may see her as nice. In fact, there's this research that Dave and I love called the Women Are Wonderful effect, that's well established in psychology. So when you ask men, what do you think of women? Most men say, oh, women are great. I love women. Women are soft, they're kind, they're gentle, they're caring. But what you're not hearing in that narrative is that she's a leader, right? She's an up and coming, take charge, future leader of this organization. And so if men are not seeing her that way, then he's probably not going to do the sponsoring, right? And the serious mentorship. He's not going to reach down and pull her up for promotion. So if that's operating, I think that's an issue for a lot of guys. And then, we mentioned before, men often are afraid of the wimp penalty or losing their man card. And some of that, I think, comes from clear misperceptions that other men in the room are much more tolerant of sexism and bias. And it's just not true. There's all this research showing when you ask men anonymously, they're not supporting bias and sexism and harassment. But they believe other men are. So we have to share with other guys that you are not alone in believing in equity and believing in justice and fairness. And if we could share that with men, I think we'd see a lot less of this reservation.
Dave, did you want to add?
Brad covered so many of them, but there are several more. If you, but I think one of the challenges though is I mentioned developing awareness, right? Because a lot of guys told us that they just didn't understand the problem, and so it was holding them back because they just didn't know where to engage or how to engage. And I'll give you an example from Brad and I that we had. I can still remember these conversations when we were doing the research for Athena Rising. And the interviews with women, we heard these stories over and over again about how they would have this idea in a meeting and they put it out there and it just kind of get ignored, fall flat. And then about 3 guys later, kind of repackage the same idea. And everybody's like, whoa, hey, Brad, that's an incredible idea. Way to go, dude. And it's like, wait a minute. How is that any different than what Michelle just said? Right. And then women shared with us, of course, they have names and terms for this, right? So they call this bropropriation or heap-eating or imitating. And Brad and I I remember this conversation we had. I was like, have you ever had this happen to you? And he's like, no. I said, me either. I said, this is so frustrating. It's like these things have been going on under our nose and we just were not aware, right? And 2 guys who were trying to be aware were not. But now that I see it, now that I know what it looks like, now I see it all the time, and now I can choose what I want to do about it in the moment there. And so I think this developing an awareness and understanding of how other people experience the workplace is so critically important. The other one I mentioned before, that why guys need feedback, and this is because we often say that, hey, I'm all about gender equity, I'm all about gender equality, and everybody should have a fair shake, and great. What are you doing about it? How well are you doing anything about it? And that's the challenge, is that we find in the workplace, the research shows that while men may espouse that they do believe in it, they're not actually doing the work to create it. And we hear this over and over again from women who will share that. And so we have this, kind of a belief, aspiration, execution gap that we've got to get over. And that's part of the problem as well. And so we've got to get back out there and make sure that we have the interactions. And this is where, one of the solutions for all of this is increased interaction with women. And this is true, right? And so much of the research has shown us that from the mere exposure effect that we find often in very close relationships like mentoring relationships, the more time we spend with somebody, the more we get to know them, the more we begin to like them, and the more we will advocate on their behalf and work with them and collaborate with them. Same thing, intergroup contact theory shows the same thing. We break down barriers, these misperceptions, these unconscious biases, implicit association, stereotypes, all that starts to go away the closer we have, we start to interact with somebody else who's not the same as us.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just really hard to see things that don't affect you, right? It's just hard to see it. And so that interaction piece is so important, of just the sort of foundational. And I think I really appreciate you having the conversation about some of these barriers, because that gap between, I hear this all the time where men say, I am committed to this, I understand the issues, I want to be an ally, but sort of at the moment where it's sort of the rubber hits the road. And so these barriers are real, right? This can be hard work. Pieces of this can be hard work. And so for us to really address that and acknowledge that, and then say, how do we help get over those barriers, I think is a really important piece of this conversation. So I wanted to come back to one piece, Brad, that you mentioned, the wimp penalty, right? The kind of anxiety that men have that if I speak up on gender equity issues, I will be viewed negatively. One kind of subset of that, I think, that I've heard dads say in particular, is that they feel and concerns about the WIMP penalty attaching when they show up in the workplace visibly as engaged dads. That's one component of being an ally that risks some stigma, risks people thinking, oh, well, maybe you're not as committed as a worker. But we know that having men show up as engaged dads in the workplace is so important, because until we really start normalizing the idea of working parents, right? Not just working moms, but working parents. It's going to be hard to really make those kind of institutional changes for us to find work-family integration. So I know in your book, you talk about one ally strategy for dads in particular, which is the leaving loudly strategy. And so I'd love for you to talk about that strategy for the dads in particular, but also to talk about, so how do we overcome that concern, particular sort of concern of penalty or stigma that attaches to bringing your dad self fully to work, even though that's so important, I think, to our gender equity goals.
Yeah, I have to say, I think Dave really wrote about this extensively. So I'm going to let him kick off with this, Michelle, and then I'll jump in. But I think the whole leaving loudly thing, that was kind of Dave's idea. So I'll let him start with that.
Yeah, Dave, I'd love to hear. I think it's a great ally strategy, so powerful.
Yeah, and I love the language you use there, the normalizing, and which is, I think, so important to this whole conversation. And it's normalizing for lots of people. It's normalizing for women, and it's normalizing for other men out there. And as we talked about before, because we have raised this next generation of young men and employees out there who expect to combine work and family in a way that works for them. I think we have to begin to think about how are we going to do that? How are we going to shift this traditional workplace into something that works for everyone, and that includes men. And so we have to begin to normalize and destigmatize. And there's so much stigma attached to caregiving broadly, that somehow, because we're men, the traditional notion that we're the primary breadwinners, which, oh, by the way, is not necessarily the case anymore, that we don't do caregiving, and we do. And it's not that we don't do it, it's we also want to be doing it, and we want to be doing more of it, and we want to be public about it and be able to share and talk about it, because this is the authentic person, the authentic leader that I want to be. And so we heard that from allies over and over again, that you need to be able to talk about family. You need to be able to have pictures of your family on your desk, and you need to be able to talk about your caregiving responsibilities when you have them. And we expect that most men do out there. And this could be, when you've got to go take a kid to the doctor, it's your turn, or God forbid they're sick and you got to take a day off, right? And take a day of paid sick leave. And you're going to miss a meeting or be absent for some reason, that guys would just slink out of the office, slide out the back door, and be hush and quiet, because they're worried about that stigma attached to it. When allies talked about, it's like, nope, you need to do the exact opposite. We need to leave loudly. I need to be very public and talk about it. It's like, hey, I got to go. I'm going to take my kid to the doctor. Have a great meeting. I'll catch up with you tomorrow. That's fine. That's great. That's normal to who we are and what we do. And that normalizes it for, if more senior men are doing this, then junior men look at that and go, see, it's okay. He's role modeling it for me. And women around, again, will see the same thing, that we're beginning to make this more normal in how we look at this. But it extends beyond just the, what you're doing in the moment right there at work. It also goes to, how we use and or advocate for different policies. They're often looked at as women's policies and programs. And, certainly flexible work was one of those up until about a year ago. And women did use flexible work arrangements more than men did, although men had more access to flexible work arrangements. But today, I think we've torn the curtain off of that one. We all understand what flexible work and remote work, and we ought to separate those two a little bit to talk about what those are, but the benefits of those and how we can use those to combine them in a way that is, one, advantageous for our employer, but it's also advantageous for us as parents and as caregivers, and how we can combine things in a way that works for families today in the 21st century workplace, where most families have dual earners. With the exception of that top 1% out there that still has a stay-at-home parent, which tends to be a wife. But the rest of us we're all dual earners, and we let's just get back to the reality of what we need out there. And so we've got to do that. Same thing when it comes to, for the younger parents out there taking parental leave. Take it all. For the guys in particular, make sure, again, you're talking about it. When you go on parental leave, take every single day of it. And then when you put that out of office work reply on your email, make sure you're proud and bold about it, right? That I'm taking leave to go spend time raising my daughter, and I can't wait to, bond with her, and, and I'll see you in 6 months, or if you're so fortunate to get 6 months of parental leave out there. But we've got to be much more public about this and quit ignoring or just making some sort of an assumption that men are not caregivers, because we are.
Absolutely. To me, that is among the most powerful pieces of allyship. And because it models, it lifts up women, but it also models to other men, right? As you said, the junior men who are looking up to the leaders to see what is appropriate, what is okay in this scenario. Absolutely. Brad, did you ever have other thoughts or thoughts about the, Dave was sort of, I think, leading us into some of the more institutional or structural or policy-based kind of things that as allies for gender equity, we could also be kind of, in addition to that interpersonal piece, but having our eye on or advocating for.
Yeah, Dave covered that so well, Michelle. I think the only thing that I would add is remember that this also needs to factor into your own mentoring conversations, right? So if I'm serving as a mentor and or a sponsor and, to a junior male or female, I need to talk about this in those relationships too. Dave mentioned the pictures of family, but I also need to be willing to disclose a bit. Disclosure can be very powerful. I've really wrestled with taking care of both my obligations to my family and trying to make it as partner, right, in this firm. And that was really hard, and it didn't always go so well. And I stumbled. And here are some of the things that I would do a little differently if I were starting over where you are. I think that kind of authenticity and self-disclosure and normalizing, a lot of the challenge really is really important, just from a very personal perspective.
Absolutely. And I think toward that end, we're time for just a couple more questions. Towards the idea of sort of authenticity and self-disclosure, and we have to have some, I think, a personal connection and personal skin in the game. I actually want to ask you if you might share a time in your own allyship journey where you feel like you made a mistake, right? So we are talking about this fear that we all have as allies in stepping in it, and saying the wrong thing. And I think it's important for folks to know that that's actually okay, it happens, and you can recover from it and you can learn from it. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share, a personal story about a time in your journey. I think journey is the perfect word for this, right? It's a journey, it's not a destination, it's a journey of male allyship for gender equity in which you feel like you made a misstep. And how did you recover? How did you learn? Why did that still compel you to continue leaning in to this journey?
Yeah, this really is something Dave should talk about because he makes most of the mistakes in our. No, I'm totally kidding. So let me just, to your point about the journey, Michelle, let me just say that I'm going to share with you a story from the beginning of our collaboration and then something from today. And let me just start with today. So today, Dave and I did an event, a virtual event for the European Command of the Army. An Army general introduced us. This was a big group in Stuttgart, Germany. And here's what we missed. So, this has been planned for a while. They did this really nice flyer. Dave and I were going to be speaking on male allyship for International Women's Day. And the person introducing us was a male general. So they produced this nice flyer for International Women's Day. It's got 3 white dudes on it. And we just totally missed the fact that, we just participated in a manel, right? And no surprise, and totally appropriately, a lot of women there in Germany and Europe, when they saw that flyer, they said, "What is this? A bunch of guys coming to mansplain to us, about gender equity." And and we had to do some damage control when we started today. We had to say, "Hey, we got it wrong. We should have noticed that." And to be honest, I'm not sure if Dave and I even saw the flyer ahead of time, but we still needed to address it. And we needed to say, hey, we got this wrong right out of the gates. We should have been more thoughtful about this. And it didn't send the right message. This is really about collaboration. It's not about men speaking for women. So if we could do this over, we would. And so really sorry about how that landed. So that's just from today. We've been at this for 8 years. You'd think we'd be a little smarter by now. But way back at the beginning, when Dave and I first started, for Athena Rising, our first book, that was all about men mentoring women. And so most people don't know this, but that was not the working title of the book. So the working title of the book was Guiding Athena. And we love the Athena metaphor. It's very powerful when it comes to framing women. And guiding is a synonym for mentoring. We thought, oh, what a perfect title. We loved it. We saw no problem. And then it was about literally a month or two before publication, our publisher, who was a woman, came to us and said, dudes, can we have a conversation about this title? Has it ever occurred to you how that might land with women, right? That they need to be guided. And of course, we had never considered it from that angle. And we just thought, oh my goodness. So she saved us from ourselves, right, in giving us that feedback. And it made all the difference, right, in the book being something that was appealing to both men and women. But we would have missed that. So, gosh, Dave, it just feels to me like almost every week or two, we have another humble learning experience along the way.
Yeah, there are too many to count. I can just, I look back across just the time Brad and I have been working on this together, where you would think, two guys who are focused on this and really, really working to create, more equity out there, that we would, again, be more observant and be more aware and all of these things, just like Brad said. And I can't tell you how many times where, again, back in the day when we used to go to conferences, remember, and speak in person, and you might have a slide presentation up there on the screen, and guys, I can't tell you how many times where we missed something, little details or things on a picture that seemed, we probably put 2 seconds of thought into that picture. It was like, oh, we're looking for this, and so there we go. And it's like, how do we miss that, right? And I don't know. I don't know how we missed that, but those happened, several times where somebody would mention it to us, and and instead of reacting of like, oh damn it, why is she so sensitive about it? It was like, oh, thank God you saw that and you said something to us, because I don't know how many times we would have used that beyond this particular event if you hadn't said something. So thank you, you saved us on that one.
Yeah, and what I love about these stories actually is that they didn't deter you from continuing to learn and grow and collaborate, because this is all, everything that I'm hearing from your research, talking to both women and men, and all that you've learned is that at the core of this, it's about collaboration. At the core of it, it's about building partnerships. And that requires us to keep engaging, keep learning, and it was so easy when all of us make mistakes in these kinds of allyship journeys to retreat. I think it's just such a natural, easy human thing to do. But to continue pulling each other along together as partners is the way I think we're going to really, really end up making progress toward gender equity, which, as we know, benefits all of us. So I really appreciate you sharing those personal, authentic stories of the bumps along your journey. It's really powerful. Well, I think we have just like a minute left. So I'm wondering, last thing, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I would say, we're in the middle of Women's History Month. We recently celebrated International Women's Day. I think one of the themes of that day was choose to challenge. So I'm wondering if you might have just one piece of final advice that each of you might want to share with, particularly the dads who are listening to this conversation and are fathering Together community, if they were going to take, the first step towards choosing to challenge gender inequity in their workplaces, what would that first step be?
Gosh, yeah, and I agree with you. I love the theme this year, choose to challenge, because it resonates so much with what allyship is all about, and challenging yourself to be better, right, and to grow and to learn along the way, and to be more authentic and open about these conversations, and then challenging others and challenging your leaders and your organization to be better. And I think on that theme in particular, and because I think if we look at it, Wednesday is Equal Pay Day. So for everybody, women out there, women broadly in that category, that this is how, again, how much the difference is there in that 81 cents on the dollar for men. So I think we need to look at pay transparency in particular and challenge the processes that we have in our company to, have we ever done a pay audit and looked at disaggregating the data and looking at that, and challenge our leadership to do that and to prove that we are being equitable and to be public and transparent about how we're doing that. But it takes, again, sometimes it takes a grassroots effort, and to really push our leadership on why this is important to do this.
Love it. Pay transparency is a great first step. I just read a report that gender pay gap is expected to increase by about 5% because of the pandemic. So keeping our eye on that, fantastic first step. And Brad, last thought?
Yeah. So for me, Michelle, I think it is making mentoring and sponsoring of women part of your ally brand if you're a male. So we know that men are reluctant in various ways. Sometimes it's because they're worried, if I'm mentoring loudly a woman, what will people think, right? There'll be gossip. I just want to let men know there's not going to be any gossip if mentoring women is part of your brand, right? If you mentor multiple women, yeah, if you never mentor women and start spending a lot of time with just one junior woman, that might look a little creepy and you're setting yourself up. Mentor several women, just like you're mentoring several men, and people know that's just part of your brand. It's what you do. I think you have nothing to be concerned about there if you're doing it. And gosh, talk about a way to get your company or your organization to real gender balance. Do an audit on yourself. Ask yourself, what's the gender balance in my mentees? And I need to make sure I hold myself accountable for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we've heard so many great tips and advice for men who are listening and want to be engaged to build their ally brand, which is the goal that we're all seeking. So thank you, and for building partnerships together. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate your time and your insights. Love to hand the floor over back to Brian, just for a last thank you from our Fathering Together leadership.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Michelle, for moderating. My daughters always want to make an appearance at the end. It was quite well timed. They're watching a movie and there was a gap in the show. So great timing all around for this evening, but also great insights. I just reflecting a lot on some of the comments you were making for myself, just in how I show up at work for my colleagues versus even how I show up at home with my wife and children. And I think there's just so many layers to this that all this will continue to unpack. So appreciate the wisdom here. Thank you all for attending as well. Next week is our final week where we're focused on the community and a bit more of the activism side that dads can take and really truly owning all aspects of their fatherhood. So I encourage you to register and sign up for next week as we close out our 5-part series here for Stand Up Dads. And as I was telling the panelists before, we're starting to think ahead to the next round too. So we'll start to pepper some more information in to the year ahead for Fathering Together and our Stand Up Dads program. So I got to go be on dad duty, but thank you all again for having us with you in your home tonight. So thank you.
I'm gonna have ice cream. Bye.
Thank you.